Why does your voice change the moment you step into work? That professional tone you switch on, is it really professionalism or is it survival? Because for millions of people, especially African Americans, corporate language is not neutral. It is a system that rewards conformity, filters identity, and quietly pushes culture out of the room. But to really understand this, we have to go deeper. Because this isn't new. The adjustment of voice, the shifting of tone, the awareness of how you sound in certain spaces, that didn't begin in corporate America. That is something that was cultivated over generations. There was a time when how you spoke could determine how you were treated. Whether you were respected, whether you were heard, and in many cases, whether you were safe. Speech was never just about communication. It signaled education. It signaled status. It signaled where you belonged or where you were not supposed to be. And because of that, people learned to listen carefully, not just to what was said, but to how it was said. But what we also have to understand is this, that dynamic did not disappear. It evolved. Even today, certain dialects of English are still judged through a hierarchy. Some are labeled as proper, articulate, or professional, while others are dismissed as broken, incorrect, or even ignorant. And that perception carries real consequences. It can affect how someone is evaluated in a job interview, how they are treated in a classroom, how seriously their ideas are taken in professional spaces. So when people adjust how they speak, it is not always about preference. Often, it is about navigating perception. Because language, in many environments, still functions as a gatekeeper. It determines access, it influences opportunity, and it shapes how intelligence is perceived, even when the underlying structure of the language being spoken is just as complex, just as rule-governed, and just as meaningful. And this is where we have to pause, because what began as a survival strategy has now, in many ways, been normalized as a standard. And that's a dangerous shift, because when survival strategies become expectations, we stop questioning them, we stop examining them, we stop asking whether they are still necessary or whether they are quietly costing us something. Because every time we adjust our voice to fit into a space, we have to ask, what are we gaining and what are we giving up? Are we gaining access, opportunity, influence? Or are we slowly disconnecting from the very cultural expressions that carry our history, our identity, and our way of seeing the world? Because language is not just about sounding correct. Language is memory. Language is rhythm. Language is identity. And within African American linguistic tradition, there exists a depth of expression, a musicality, a structure, a logic that is rooted in African linguistic systems and carried forward across generations. That is not something to be erased. That is something to be understood, something to be cultivated, something to be respected. So the goal is not to reject professionalism. The goal is to redefine it, to expand it, to create space where clarity and cultural expression can exist at the same time, where intelligence is not measured by how closely you sound to a single standard, but by how effectively you communicate, think, and express. Because in the end, the question is not, should we know how to adjust our voice? The question is, why are we still required to? And what would it look like to build spaces where we no longer have to? At Heritage Dialects, we study, preserve, and cultivate African American linguistic traditions as structured systems of communication with history, logic, and cultural depth. We do this freely, without the conventional tropes, limiting narratives, and stereotypes that have been placed on our ways of speaking. Because language is not just how we speak, it is how we carry who we are, our language, our legacy.